YouTube and in the audience. This is entitled The Fall and Later Works of Babylon, which we read about in Revelation, so I will attempt to explain what that is. There's lots of views out there. I've listened to them and hardly anybody knows, but I think this is it. We look at what's called the historicist interpretation. I will go to the next slide. This is a very brief summary of what's happened in Revelation, so you can see what it isn't and what's coming next. So chapter 1 is about who Jesus is. Chapter 2 and 3 is basically the history of the church, and it's no coincidence that that's first, because judgment must begin with the house of God. Chapters 4 to 5 is a vision of heaven, which is like the control center of everything that's going on earth. Chapter 6 is the rise and fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of what you might call nominal Christianity under Constantine, and the fall of the paganism, the old gods. And that's what that imagery in that chapter is talking about. Chapters 7 and 8 are the establishment of the tribes in Europe, that they might be saved. And those tribes are basically the 12 tribes of Israel. And if you look around this school, you've got the fleur de lis and the which is a symbol of Levi, which were the teaching tribe, the priests, and the lion, which is of Judah, on this lectern and around the school. So there's many evidences of them being in Europe. Chapter 9 is about the rise of Islam and war with the Catholics in the East. Chapters 10 to 12 are the printing of the Bible, the little book open, preaching and persecution by Catholicism in the West. Chapters 13 to 14 is about the activities of the papacy and wars in Northern Europe. 15 to 17 is about the downfall and division of the papal Roman Empire in Europe. So I'll go to the next slide. And we're just going to have a quick look at chapter 17 to just get the context, and you can see what it's not, and it's clearer what it is in chapter 18. And it says in chapter 17, I'll show thee the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters. When the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Upon her forehead was the name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of saints. And then in verse 15, it explains that the waters on which she sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So that's quite a lot of detail there, but just to explain what it means, she sits upon, she oppresses or is put up by this woman, which we'll see is the Catholic Church, the medieval church as it was then. The peoples, the word is laos, which means people in general. It's a different word from demos, where we get democracy, which denotes your own populace. So she's sitting on foreigners, many people. She's spreading abroad. She's not just concerned with one country. Fornication, which is basically not about love or truth. That's not what it's about. It's about how the kings and the religious organization used each other to control people. People only knew a false, superficial version of Jesus. It was like they would the kings would get the people's subservience through the church, and the church would get land and riches. It was a good deal for them, but not for anybody else. And it says they were drunk with her wine. What's her wine? Well, the thing about wine and alcohol is it kind of corrupts or pollutes the mind. The sweetness is turned to alcohol, so instead of energy, you get a sort of a mind-altering effect, which obviously some people use, but it doesn't do you any good in the long run. And so her religion is what makes people drunk. It gives people a false sense of security and a false sense of joy, and false hopes. So it's not sound. It blinds and blurs thinking and action, and killing. And it talks about them killing people. And killing God's true witnesses was part of that religion. They thought they were serving God, and they did it with joy, but God wasn't pleased. And then it talks about the multitudes, which means a throng or a rabble or a riot that carries her along. And it comes from the Greek word echo, where we get, obviously our word echo comes from. So it's all about reflected sound, unclear, indirect noise. You can get carried along by you can't see what's going on. You just follow the crowd, and that's basically what was going on. It wasn't sort of, and nothing was proved to be right. It was all just, look at all these people, they can't be wrong. It was that kind of persuasion. And so it says, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. And of course, the Catholic Church, you've got the cardinals in red and the other priests in purple, which is, the Bible says nothing about this for God's people. You can find it in the Babylonian religion, though, and all the finery and the regalia and costly stuff. And it carries on, talks about her having a beast with 10 horns, which are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings for 1 hour with the beast. So in Daniel, he had a vision of the beast with 10 toes, and we can identify that as Europe. And so these were horns. The kings were horns on this empire which she sat on, and they have one mind, and they give power and strength to the beast. So, as I said, they were supporting her, and they will make war with the Lamb. They went to war with God's true witnesses. And the 10 horns, which down in verse 16, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And so because of all the things that were going on, the Bible started to come out, people started to expose the truth, and people get more and more fed up with, the Catholic Church introducing new laws which weren't approved by anybody else, fining people for not keeping those laws. They were getting money off people to so-called get their dead relations out of purgatory. It all made up. Mass immorality. I had a book on it once. I wish I hadn't. It's not very nice. And they were teaching myths, and ignorance of the truth was the result. And nobody was happy. And even the king, some of the nobles in places like Germany were saying, well, it's taking our land and our people and are corrupting us. We're against this now. It's a load of rubbish. So that the love turned to hatred. That's the nature of fornication. So they once supported her, but then they turned, and then you had wars in places like Holland and Germany and Czech Republic and England, of course, civil wars, and burned with fire. Next. So that's just an old thing I got. That's how she might be presented, but you turn it the right way up, not quite so pretty. So that's. We see that's what happens. There's been this overthrow of their power in Northern Europe, and that's why in verse 18, after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, have great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, Babylon, the great is fallen, is fallen. So another angel means something distinct, something a bit different now, a new chapter. Same source, of course, and Babylon the Great, I'm taking that as the empire on which the whore or the woman sits, and that was what's undone in the sense that she was fallen from power in two senses. Is fallen, so she no longer controls the mind or the body, whereas she used to, in people's thinking and people's actions. People were forced to receive her mark, to trade and things like that. So, the politics and the economics and the wealth of most of Northern Europe, she's lost, right? So what is she going to do next? It says she's become the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So point one is she still exists, okay? She hasn't gone, she's just morphed a bit. Jeremiah explains this. He uses the same phrase. It says, for among my people were found wicked men. They lay wait, they set a trap, they catch men. As a cage is full of birds, so are their houses full of deceit. Therefore they are become great and waxen rich. They overpass the deeds of the wicked. They judge not the cause of the fatherless, yet they prosper. And the right of the needy they do not judge. So, they should judge. They're there as ministers of God, so to speak, but they're not there to judge and do things right. They're there to get rich and various wickednesses. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests bear rule by their means or their own ideas, and my people love to have it so. So in Jeremiah's time, people wanted that. They wanted to hear smooth things. So she remains as a rich religion for deceived people that love that sort of thing. So just like old Babylon, in which the Israelites, or the house of Judah, was transported to, her religion and thinking continued to exist. After the Medes and Persians overpowered it, Babylon was still there, the religion was still there, it just wasn't in power anymore. So Jews remained there, even in Peter's time. He writes to the church, which was at Babylon. And we read in Revelation 2 that the seat of their religion moved west to Pergamos. So verse 3 continues, it says, the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance or the power of her delicacies, or her pride, or her insolence. So she hasn't changed her attitude, it's just been taken down a peg or two. So where are they now getting rich? Where have they moved their theatre of operations? So what history tells us that the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors or conquerors sailed in galleons to Central and South America, also Africa and beyond, in the name of Christ, to convert the heathen, but they basically just robbed these people of their wealth. So you can read all about all this in history, and it's interesting that the people that attacked these people were the pirates, which were the Jews, which were expelled from Spain. These pirate ships had Hebrew names and things like that. So God promised Judah that they would get their own back. But anyway, so with the fall of the Aztec capital in Mexico in August 1521, temples, palaces, storehouses, and private homes were looted for their valuables. Indigenous peoples were frequently captured and tortured to reveal the whereabouts of their valuables, and particularly anything at all made of gold. Conquistadors were insatiable in their greed for everything. So it had been going on for a while. So similarly with the Incas of Peru and for their silver, and that's in the British Museum, is a depiction of the collection of gold tribute by Spanish colonial authorities in New Spain, which is now called Mexico. And that was just the beginning. They went to Angola, Brazil, Mozambique, Goa, and further east. And that's why they got this long list of merchandise given, which is basically the merchandise of 18th century empires. So it talks of gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, fine wood, all manner of vessels of ivory, precious woods, brass, iron, marble, silken odours, ornaments, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, beasts, sheep, horses, chariots, slaves, and souls of men. So I'm not saying that the British and other people weren't guilty of this as well, but this is what was going on. So Portugal took 10 times as many African slaves to Brazil as the British and others took to North America. So it was huge amount of it going on. There is the combined Spanish and Portuguese empires during the Iberian Europe up to 1640. You can see they were spreading right as far as Papua New Guinea and all those places. And there's the extent of the Portuguese Empire at its height. So pretty extensive. So Revelation 18 carries on. It says, I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, that you receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. So God had to do something for his own name's sake. They were going in his name, but giving him a bad name. says, reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her, double according to her works, in the cup which she hath filled to her double. There's a lot of doubles there. So in the Old Testament, that was the punishment for theft. You know, if the theft be certainly found in his hand alive, whether it be ox or ass or sheep, he should restore double. So that was what was going on. Verse 7 says, how much has she glorified herself and lived deliciously? So much torment and grief give her, for she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. So she thought, you know, I'm doing all right, thanks. And it's interesting that Lisbon, which was basically the business hub of this empire, it was the, you know, the main port going west, and she was known as Riana do Mar, which means the queen of the sea, which fits that verse. It says, therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, she should be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God that judges her. So there's two kind of senses in which happen. We're going to look at a little video now which talks about what happened physically. So I'll let that play.
Lisbon, capital city of Portugal, and one of the oldest cities in Europe. But today, remnants of its ancient glories are hard to find. A gilded city in the center of a world empire, until the day disaster struck. Moments before 9:30 a.m. on November 1st, 1755, a sudden sliding movement between two gigantic tectonic plates occurs. The result? A massive magnitude 8.5 earthquake, one of the most powerful in modern European history. 150 miles from the epicenter, the full power of the earthquake strikes Lisbon. Nobody knows exactly how many people were crushed in those first terrifying moments, but time and place would conspire to seal the fate of tens of thousands. Survivors flee towards open ground down by the Tagus River. 150 miles offshore, the earthquake has displaced trillions of gallons of water. It results in a tsunami, which takes less than 40 minutes to reach Lisbon. The tsunami kills hundreds, but in a cruel twist of fate, just before the earthquake strikes, thousands of candles are lit in Lisbon to celebrate the Feast of All Saints. As the waters recede, it's not enough to extinguish the gathering flames that spread and engulf the city. Earthquake, tsunami, and fire, Lisbon, one of Europe's richest seaports, has been transformed. No more a sea of gold, it has become a repository of charred and blackened bones.
Okay, so what am I going to say about that? Just to go into a couple more details. We're going to read about how an angel threw a great millstone into the sea, which is very interesting description. Technical difficulty there. There we go. So just the details. It was 9:40 a.m. it hit on Sunday, the 1st of November, 1755. Now that God is a God of timing, and at that particular time, the inhabitants of Lisbon were gathered or travelling up the narrow streets to the opulent layered cathedrals and churches for All Saints' Day or All Hallows, which is, a major event in their calendar, and all the Protestants were basically advised to stay away, to come out of her, my people, in a physical sense. So it hit at exactly the time that they were in celebrating, that feast day, and the biggest earthquake in European history up to then struck. So they were crushed with stones and icons, the icons that they prayed to, killed them, and the survivors fleeing to the harbour were hit by a tsunami that arrived later. So it's like a perfect storm. The 55 convents and monasteries were severely damaged, And the alluvial soil foundations, the whole sort of geography of Lisbon is like a bowl, and it of soft earth like that, liquefied. The riverfront quay sank and disappeared, and the candles lit in houses for the feast day and cooking fires started fires, and the bowl-shaped geography helped create a firestorm. And that was in the days when they had narrow streets as well. So hundreds of prisoners, like ravening wolves, escaped from the local jails and began looting the city. Residents who returned to collect valuables were raped and killed. Animals fled to the hills. Archaeological analysis of the human bones shows cuts along the leg bones, i.e. Cannibalism. Skulls were crushed by weapons. Sailors found piles of bodies and furniture in the sea after, washed out by the retreating tsunami. So that's a picture of what it was like before, and there's a picture of what merchants in various countries, were there, and they took back the images. Also, it was days before cameras, but they were good at drawing. So, as I say, non-Catholic British merchants were tolerated except on holy days such as this. So they stayed in their residences on their hills so they could see it from a distance. Verse 9 says, "The kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning." So it was seen in various ways, as we'll see. I found there were actually 72 convents in Lisbon at the time. I thought it was a huge number, and I had my suspicions, and researchers have basically pointed out it's now an open secret that few Portuguese are told that 18th century convents were in fact brothels for the elite. And even today you can get these cakes in Brazil, barriga de freira, which basically means nuns' bellies. So yeah. So pre-1755 Lisbon was a creepy Gothic horror novel, from the persecution of Protestants and Jews to the religious processions through narrow streets every 2 days, led by priests robed in black, carrying human skulls. The Inquisition, they had one in Portugal, particularly practiced public burning, known as auto de fe, and that took place on that harbour area we looked at that got flooded, destroyed by the tsunami. And it says, "In her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and all that was slain upon the earth." So if you didn't agree with their doctrines, you got burned. And it says, "Rejoice over her, you heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged her on you." And as we'll see, it was made known to all and sundry. And it talks in Ecclesiastes, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, the sons of men is fully set in to do evil. So God had to do something. He had to show himself, and it had a very positive effect. He didn't want to wait hundreds of years. He targeted in a very interesting way. Some people pointed out that there were actual sort of brothels and unbelievers' places weren't touched, but the churches and cathedrals were destroyed, and people started to get a message. There had been minor earthquakes before, even one that destroyed 1,500 homes, but this one destroyed 85% of the city structures, including the Palace of the Inquisition. The Alfama, the red light district, and other humble dwellings suffered only minor damage. People asked, why were the cathedrals full of faithful worshippers were destroyed while the brothels remained standing? Agitations in the water were felt the day before in Barbados and Lake Ontario, and on the day almost all the springs and lakes of Britain and every part of Europe were violently agitated, many of them throwing up mud and sand and emitting a fetid odour. The hot wells of Bristol, I've been there, there's a place called Hot Wells, were coloured red and rendered unfit for use for some month afterwards. So all of Europe and the Americas got a message from God that I've done something, and so they were prepared. Like this was like a John the Baptist event. There's news coming. So standing afar off for the fear of her judgment, saying, "Alas, the great city Babylon, the mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come." So the city was actually rebuilt, you know, and the British and others helped rebuild the city. But the main effect of this was that it shook thinking. It was an earthquake a spiritual earthquake. So by 1755, Lisbon was one of the largest cities in Europe. The catastrophic event shocked the whole of Europe and left a deep impression on its collective psyche. Many lost their faith in religious dogma and replaced it for the need for scientific explanation or godless rationalism. Thinkers such as Voltaire contributed to the French Revolution against church and monarchy. Some date the rise of atheism to this event. Priests said it was God's judgment against man's sin generally, and Jesuits had a witch hunt within the church, burning a few false converts. Most people rejected these explanations as the timing of this perfect storm was specifically targeted them, and that burning people achieved nothing. So people started to break away from their old bondage to the old ways of thinking. And the verse in 21, it says, "The mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall the great city Babylon be thrown down and be found no more at all." So, you know, you can look at it physically, but also spiritually. You know, it's like the waves of this event ran through people. As this, I'll explain a bit more in a minute. So the event was like smelling salts, if you're familiar with them. If someone's passed out or something and they wake people up from their drunkenness. And this guy, 1759, 4 years later, Pombal, the Secretary of State in Portugal, suspicious of their wealth, expelled the Jesuits from Portugal and Portuguese possessions overseas, including Brazil. Lisbon had been their centre for evangelization. And so Spain followed suit in its American viceroyalties in 1767. This was all part of a broader reaction in Europe, leading to the suppression of the entire Jesuit order in 1773. So 18th century Europe was discovering the power and unifying force of information, newspapers. We've got the internet today, but the world was shrinking in the sense that, you know, people started to get to know what was going on. They weren't living little parochial lives anymore. So they offered Europeans the opportunity to directly follow what was happening all over the world. The Lisbon earthquake was perhaps the first event to become major news. The Scots magazine pictured Lisbon as one of the richest and best situated cities in the world, contained with its environments about 500,000 inhabitants till the fatal 1st of November. Wealth, the Inquisition, and the worship of images to an appreciably large section of the outside world was famous for these three things. Another note was, Lisbon was full of pride, but now Lisbon, Queen of the Seas, is not anymore. And that's that picture is from a German newspaper saying the same sort of thing. So, you know, the message was going throughout Europe and beyond. And it says, verse 22, "The voice of harpers and musicians and pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of the millstone shall be no more heard in thee." Now, how do I explain that? Well, people used to kind of live and work for the glory and enrichment of the Catholic Church. You know, that's how they got their social prestige. If you weren't a Catholic, you were socially ostracized, so you had to do it in their name. But now it was a whole new thinking, and, you know, it's secularization, what you might call. And the very project of modernity is born out of a desire for a world without surprises, a safe world, a world without fear. You know, in the religious world, things would happen and people lived in fear, and, you know, they would pay for their masses and get their blessings, and they had no explanation. It was just all God's will. And of course, you know, the church made money out of this and didn't educate anybody. So science was now seen as the answer, right natural thinking. And this guy Pombal set about reconstructing the city to resist repeat natural disasters. The Lisbon quake was the first time that a state took charge of disaster response and reconstruction. So they made big, broad streets, so if there was ever another one, people would have more chance of surviving. It says, the light of the candles shall shine no more in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more in thee, at all in thee. Thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were the nations deceived. So what does that mean? The candle, it tells in Job, says the light of the wicked shall be put out, and the spark of his fire shall not shine. The light of the dark shall be dark in his tabernacle, and his candle shall be put out with him. And in Proverbs 20 verse 27, the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord, searching the inward parts of the belly. So, of course, they still have physical candles in churches and cathedrals, but people no longer think and reason the old superstitious medieval Catholic ways. That's their lights. That's the whole way people see the world and God and life. It's that candle has been put out, and now you've either got rationalism, secularism, or you've got the true faith. So people, if you talk to people, man in the street today, if you could go back before that time, they would think very differently, but now they don't. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall no more heard at all in. So the church was once kind of the glue or life of society. If you were not a practicing Catholic, you were a social outcast. But today, most people get married. In those days, most people got married and in church, and they'd name their girls Mary and boys after disciples. But now very few people marry, and the church blessing is seen as irrelevant. So it's become an anachronism, for most people. And it's a whole new kind of identity of nations. So what is she doing now? It says in Jeremiah, can a leopard change its spots? Well, the answer, of course, is God can change people if they repent, but there's no evidence that they have repented. So a leopard's spots are its marks or its ways. You should expect, you might be caged a leopard, but it's still a leopard. It's still going to behave the same way. I don't know what's happened there. In verse 3, we read how about the merchants waxed rich through the abundance of their delicacies or their pride and their insolence. And verse 23, above it, it says, thy merchants were the great men of the earth. So that's been the spots or the ways up to now. So you should kind of expect the same thing. So all we can do is say, okay, what do we know? What's going on now, and does it fit? The great merchants of the earth today would be modern great international merchants or multinational companies. Now, next page. Here is the Vatican Global Forum in 2016, hosted by Fortune and Time magazine, where the world's most prominent business and thought leaders seek to fit in with the vision of the Holy Father of digital identities, which is aided by the spread of mobile phones and other technology, the remaining 20% of the world's population that don't have one. So what's that all about? So editors from Time and Fortune magazine presented Pope Francis with the report of their global forum in Rome, attended by the select Fortune 500 CEOs, scholars, labour and church leaders and philanthropists. The report, The 21st Century Challenge, Forging a New Social Compact, was inspired by the Pope's plea for a broader prosperity and lasting ways to lift the poor. Of course, we know historically they haven't got a very good track record in helping the poor, but anyway. Forum delegates focused on creating jobs and fair wages, reducing environmental degradation, improving education and health access, and becoming more financially inclusive. All sounds very nice. Among those present were CEOs from Dow Chemical, IBM, Johnson & Johnson, Monsanto, McKinsey, Siemens, Virgin Group, all those well-known names. The Pope Francis said, our world today is marked by great unrest. Upon receiving the report, inequality between peoples continues to rise, And many communities are impacted directly by war and poverty, and the migration and displacement of flow from them. Your very presence here today is a sign of such hope, because it shows that you recognize the issues before us and the imperative to act decisively. So it's basically saying we want to help the poor, and let us. We're Catholics. We can get millions of people to. We'll help you fulfill this dream, and we'll be the glue for it. We'll play a part. But interesting, the word sorceries in that verse was pharmakia, where we get the word pharmaceuticals, and we're told that we need medicines to be healthy, and of course it's a large money spinner. Other things we can read about the leopard not changing its spots. It talks about in Revelation about how she caused people not to be able to buy and sell if they didn't have the mark. Now, we've seen a lot. The technology for doing that is around today. Many people have had their accounts closed on the accusation that they were politically exposed. Now, I haven't got the data to say exactly, who, what, and why, but I'm just saying that there is the potential there for, if people disagree, to be debanked. Now, so that for that reason, I'm not going to get on the political bandwagon, And anyway, here's another reason: God's going to sort it out. It says here in Thessalonians, the mystery of iniquity does already work. Only he who lets it will let until it be taken out of the way. Then shall the wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. So, God knows what's going on. He'll reveal it when it suits him, and he'll deal with it. We've got people in power that have a narrative of, what we should think and how we should behave. And God will allow it to exist for a while. And of course, this has all happened before. We go right back to the beginning. The whole earth was of one language, one speech, one narrative. And, they built a tower, and the tower was like, everybody looks up to this, and the people in the tower are the controllers, and others just do as you're told, it's for your good. Will it succeed? It says, they said to one another, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they made brick for stone, slime for mortar. Let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach to heaven. Let us make us a name, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. So they're taking, they wanted to have a united mankind, regardless of God's ways. And if you read back in Genesis, there the people doing that were evil people. So they put their own evil great men at the top. God was left out. So God decided to confuse their languages. People weren't listening or understanding each other. Therefore, it's called Babel. That's where Babylon comes from. But on a positive note, to end, we don't have to worry too much, because God's got plans. We just have to be faithful in our own governing ourselves, so to speak. The whole chapters 19, 20, 21 are the good news, which I haven't done, but you can look at. It says, after these things I heard a great voice of much people in heaven saying, Alleluia, salvation and glory and honour and power unto the Lord our God, for true and righteous are his judgments. He has judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and has avenged the blood of the servants at her hand. And then it goes into detail about what God's got in store for the whole earth, and it's wonderful stuff. So we just got to focus on that. And that's it.